former Lexington graduate will be heading off to Columbia Law on a full scholarship, all thanks to a program with the Legal Defense Fund. Andrew Brennan graduated from Dunbar High and then got his undergraduate degree at the University of North Carolina. He continued his education with a master's at Harvard University, focusing on civil rights law and racial justice in public schools. He even co-founded the Kentucky Student Voice team and served as finance and audit chair on the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority Board of Directors, which was appointed by the governor. Now he is just one of 10 recipients of the Marshall Motley Scholars Program, named in honor of Supreme Court Justice and legendary civil rights attorney Thurgood Marshall, as well as the first black woman to ever serve as a federal judge, Constance Baker Motley.
When I think about what that meant to them, what it means to me, I think of it as my responsibility to help continue to pay that forward, so that more Black families like my own can benefit from the promise that education has to offer.
In exchange for the full law scholarship and professional development, scholars will then devote the first 8 years of their careers to practicing civil rights law in service of Black communities in the South. Brennan says he plans to return to Kentucky to stand before the Supreme Court to ensure that public school students all across the Commonwealth do have access to quality and equitable education guaranteed by the state constitution.